a lot of people get really excited and they want to jump straight to, automation, or they want to jump straight to, these proactive distributed management scenarios, et cetera. And yes, that's what we all want. But with Microsoft 365, this is quite complicated.
2Lead is a remote-first company based out of Canada.
What makes a world-class Microsoft 365 intranet and digital workplace?
Microsoft 365 isn't just one product or one app, it's a suite of apps and experiences. And each of those experiences, including ones that you've probably never even engaged in, like Viva Topics, or what else was announced recently, Microsoft Viva Learn or Microsoft Viva Connections. I mean, pretty much all the Viva things that are on the table are things that you as an organization probably haven't figured out your strategy for, you're still aligning with, you're determining, is there governance for these things that we need to take into account? And yes, there is. For each of those, they have their own governance steps that you need to take to make them more successful. Again, if you didn't do those things, it's not like Viva is not going to come out. It's not like it's not going to affect your talent by being available now inside of your tenant. It's just that you won't be maximizing it, and you pay a license fee that's pretty hefty. You want to maximize, the value of those investments. So how do we think about governance then? As a general rule, we want to think about enablement first, and you can think about this from a workload specific perspective. I think that's probably best, where you say, okay, take this workload, SharePoint or OneDrive or Microsoft Teams. Each of those are the workloads. Have we configured it to best practices? Have we had an outside expert, or even just an expert that we know is authoritative here in our organization, look at the way we've configured this, thought for the future, and we know we're set up for scale, we know we're set up for success? Has that ever occurred? Another good example here is, does our IT team, especially the team that's making decisions around how you're prioritizing or using this technology, have they spent time understanding this? Do they truly understand, the various settings in that configuration, as an example discussion? So that's kind of the technical enablement, technical discussion. And if you do that well, what you absolutely do is you remove critical risks. So as an example, if you didn't know this, OneDrive's delete after a period of time. So when an employee leaves an organization, the OneDrive is tied to the employee. And when the employee, a period of time passes, if you haven't done anything, then that will delete that content. And so sometimes, actually, especially during the pandemic, people are doing a lot of sharing from OneDrive. Now we know we have reports. If you don't know this, you have reports that allow you to see who's sharing from OneDrive and who's sharing from SharePoint. And you don't want to see a threshold where there's a ton of sharing happening in OneDrive. SharePoint makes sense, right? Everything should be shared in SharePoint. But in OneDrive, if that's happening a lot, it's highly likely that people are putting departmental content, or they're putting other content in there that really shouldn't stay there. It should move from there into these, coordinated places like Microsoft Teams or SharePoint. And so there's an awareness gap, an adoption gap. There's a bunch of reasons why this is occurring. But the question is, are you even looking at that? Do you know that that occurs with OneDrive? Do you have a plan, a playbook for how you deal with the escalations and the process when people depart, and how you deal with their OneDrives? Do you have simple processes like, once a quarter, whatever your rhythm is, that look for these patterns of risk in OneDrive, which might indicate you need to incentivize or encourage people to move away from OneDrive as the primary sharing location because of this risk of losing that IP and losing the information when they depart? Not to mention there's other issues with search and protection as well, because OneDrive is protected in a very different pattern than SharePoint sites or Teams. So you guys get the idea. And I'm just picking on one little thing. There are hundreds of these examples where there's a setting or a thing that you probably didn't even know existed, because it might just be PowerShell based. It might not even be in the GUI that exists, and it's there because Microsoft built it because customers need this release valve, or they need this option that helps you control. And so that technical enablement is critical, because without it, it's very difficult to do the playbooks and the automation, right? Because you don't understand it enough to understand the steps you need to take part in, as an example. In the automation, that's our goal. So if you take that example that I just gave earlier, we can automate that disposition of the OneDrive and the escalation points. Another big one that you're going to hear most likely today from Orchestry is provisioning. So when you create these digital spaces, it's a hugely important governance opportunity, because when you create a digital space, if you ask the right questions, does this relate to a department? Is this going to contain customer information, et cetera, you can get enough information to apply specify protection rules. You can get enough information to template it for that use case. You can get enough information to improve search and relevancy on the back end, and hopefully even do, which we'll talk about in a little bit, drip campaigns or other kinds of automation that essentially say like, hey, you created an HR project site, and because it's an HR project site, there's very particular things we're going to do on this rhythm. Like once a month, we're going to do this. After 3 months, if you haven't responded to this first thing, we're going to do this thing. You can essentially take the things that a human being would have to do and programatize those motions, which is extremely cost effective, right? Is the main reason you want to do it. Plus, it's more successful because, again, these tools, if you design them the right way, can be better than a human being interacting in that point, because it can escalate and make sure that the human's focusing on the highest priority items first. So yeah, we want to get to monitoring and those things, but enablement is a critical criteria. The last one I wanted to talk about is this idea of proactive versus reactive. So even then, there's a huge difference between being proactive, as you all know from an IT perspective, and being reactive. And you can have monitoring, you can have risk mitigation, you can have deep understanding, and you've enabled everything the right way, but you can still be reactive. So making that shift to being proactive really means that you've got this automation in place, which enables you to start to think, well, what else, now that we have this, how else could we use it, right, to streamline costs, to improve the efficiency, right, of the people who are using these tools, or to improve organizational outcomes. And that's where you get the really clever and creative stuff, right, where you start to see organizations really starting to get into a lot of solution development, as an example today. A lot of times, if you want to just jump in and start to use all the apps inside of Teams, as an example, it follows a similar journey. It's really difficult to start applying all those apps to solve problems because you haven't really understood all the capabilities Teams has out of the box. And some of these things in the marketplace are redundant, right? They are essentially confusing to the user. So there's a reason to roll them out in a certain way. We provide services in Microsoft 365, everything related to SharePoint, extranets, intranets, things like that. We have Nielsen Norman award winners on our team. So a lot of that is a little bit of what we'll discuss today. So like making sense of it, organizing it, optimizing it, templating it, doing things like that, especially building on it as a platform. So if you're interested in solution development and applications, that's a big part of our business as well. If you have questions on any of these topics, please feel free to reach out. I'm super friendly, and I want this to be the start of the conversation. So yeah, looking forward to getting to know those in the audience a little bit better in the near future.